Hi there. My name is Donnie, and today I would like to talk about Logan Paul. Well, not actually. I would like to never ever have to talk about Logan Paul outside of him getting powerbombed at SummerSlam. Last year, however, Logan decided that he wanted to expand his professional skill set and take a dive into the waters of film criticism. This new venture resulted in him deciding to write a review of Jordan Peele's latest film, Nope. This review was delivered in the form of a Twitter thread, which he decided to begin by describing the film as one of the worst movies he'd seen in a long time. Oh dear. Now, you may be asking, why should anyone care what Logan Paul has to say about a Jordan Peele movie, or most things in general? And in an ideal world, the answer would be, you shouldn't. But unfortunately, Logan Paul has a level of influence that is sometimes terrifying to think about. He has a lot of young, impressionable fans who look up to him and hang on to his every word, so as much as we'd all like to pretend otherwise, the things he says do have, at the very least, a tertiary impact on how a not insignificant number of people think. And so, despite all my survival instincts screaming the title of the movie at me over and over again, I decided to take a look at what he had to say. And after reading what he had to say, I felt my kidneys start shutting down and I had to rush to the hospital, which is why this video was so late. But after reading over the thread multiple times, I think the kindest thing I could say is that I don't think Logan Paul is used to thinking about things. And I don't mean that as an insult, not entirely. What I do mean is that Logan Paul's approach to film criticism is one that is unoriginal, intellectually vapid, and personally pisses me the fuck off. Okay, maybe that was an insult. Now, I'm sure anyone who read the thread will feel very comfortable simply dismissing Logan's opinion on this movie without a second thought. And you are not wrong to do so, I need to stress that. However, I think every once in a while, for reasons I'll explain more thoroughly later on, it is necessary to actively engage with the type of mindset that could look at this thread and see anything other than pure nonsense. The observations and critiques made by Logan Paul very closely follow a type of criticism that I've been calling curtain theory. This may have a name already, but I couldn't find one, so I'm calling it curtain theory. If this actually has a name and I just missed it, don't tell anyone. Now, curtain theory is in reference to a downright ancient meme at this point, in which it pokes fun at the idea of overanalyzing a piece of fiction to create meaning where supposedly there is none. But to really explain why curtain theory sucks, I'd like to talk about another theory on artistic criticism called death of the author, which, like ludonarrative dissonance, I'm sure everyone is sick to death of hearing about, but just in case you haven't, to be very brief about it, death of the author is an argument stemming from a man named Roland Barthes, who was a French literary critic in the mid-1900s. And the essence of his argument is that it is an author's job to tell a story, and it is the job of the audience to supply the interpretation. Basically, Barthes argued that authors are not supposed to interpret their own stories. To use the curtains meme as an example, if the author intentionally made the curtains blue to specifically symbolize a deep sense of depression and melancholy, and I interpreted them to signify a sense of feeling calm and content, the author is not allowed to tell me that my interpretation is wrong. And while I am a huge fan of stories having multiple ways to be interpreted, I have some issues with this theory of criticism, because to me it trivializes the role of an author in creating a story in the first place. It reduces stories to nothing more than empty receptacles to be filled with interpretations of varying relevancy and coherence, and basically precludes authors from using the art of storytelling to convey a message with any specificity whatsoever. So that right there is a very slapdash rundown of Death of the Author, and what I call curtain theory is an offshoot of that idea in the worst way possible. Because the point of the meme is not that it disagrees with the interpretation of the curtains, but that it rejects the act of interpretation altogether. Viewing a story through the lens of curtain theory means boiling a story down to its most basic, literal parts. Any elements of a story that do not directly contribute to the development of the plot are considered extraneous and often disregarded without any consideration for their symbolic or thematic importance. Basically, it doesn't matter what color the curtains are, they're just curtains. I would like everyone to please keep this in mind as we proceed, because it only becomes more relevant the further we get down the thread. Also, if you're still watching, thank you for sitting through my rambling about art theory. I'm certain that was very boring, and you're very strong for still being here. Also, if you want to see a video that goes into this topic a little bit more in depth, you should check out Dan Olson over at Folding Ideas. He also sums up my general feeling about the Logan Paul Nope thread in a wonderfully concise way. Another absolute masterclass from the man who single-handedly strangled NFTs in their crib. Keep on folding, Mr. Olson. You're doing good work. But to tie this back to Logan Paul, and I'm very sorry about that, I think Logan is looking at this movie almost exclusively through the lens of curtain theory. But to be fair to him, a lot of his criticisms on Nope are framed as questions. I would like to think that this indicates at least a small willingness to entertain other perspectives, so with that in mind, if Logan Paul is watching this, a saw, dude. I think you do some good heel work, and if you're willing to listen, I have some notes for you. I wholeheartedly disagree with every point in your Twitter thread, but your thread indicates to me at least a partial interest in wanting to engage with films on a deeper level. And I would like to offer you a different perspective, one that allows you to engage with art on a more personal level and, in my opinion, makes viewing and discussing films, or really any story in general, a considerably more enjoyable experience. And for anyone watching who agrees with the points Logan makes in his Twitter thread, that offer extends to you as well. But before we begin, I would just like to say that much of what I'll be discussing today is based on my own personal, extremely subjective interpretation of the film and its symbolic and thematic elements. I will not make the claim that my interpretations are the definitive interpretations, which should be obvious, but I just wanted that to be said out loud. If you disagree with the arguments made in this video, I absolutely want to read about it in the comments, because as stated previously, my goal is not to explain this movie, but to offer a different perspective to people who approach films in the way that Logan Paul has with Nope. For those of you hoping this would be another bog-standard fuck Logan Paul video, I am sorry to disappoint, though I do hope you'll stick around as well, because you may be pleasantly surprised as we continue. Because while I do want to try to make a good faith attempt at unpacking Logan's more benign criticisms, the thread gets much, much worse as we go down the list, and we are doing all of them. And at some point, Logan, I am going to force you to take your medicine, and unfortunately for you, it's all grape flavored. Now, normally this is the part of the video where I would do a quick recap of the plot, but I'm not gonna do that, partially because I don't want to make this video any longer than it already is, and also because most of the arguments I'll be making today require context that can't really be delivered through a basic summary of the plot, and honestly, I think this is the type of movie that's worth watching blind before anyone has a chance to influence your opinion on it. So if you haven't seen this movie, go watch it. You owe it to yourself. For everyone else, start drinking if you haven't already. This will be a miserable experience. So, with that out of the way, Logan was kind enough to arrange his points in a numerical list, so why don't we start with number 1. Number 1. No one was curious how a quarter shot through a man's face and killed him, or why a key was lodged in the backside of the horse he was riding. So this is worded very strangely. In the movie, the official explanation for why a bunch of random debris fell out of the sky and killed Otis Haywood is that they fell out of a plane that happened to be passing overhead. This is stated very plainly in the movie, so I don't know if Logan just wasn't paying attention and missed it, in which case we're off to a great start. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, you'll be hearing that a lot in this video, so get used to it. Let's pretend Logan is asking why the explanation of debris falling from a plane was so readily accepted by the authorities. Now, normally my response to this type of criticism would be, it doesn't really matter. Theoretically, if the movie followed the police while they responded by launching a full investigation during which they would try to ascertain which plane exactly was flying overhead at the time of Otis's death, and why said plane ejected a number of random objects that resulted in his death, would that make the story more exciting in any way? Would it contribute at all to the major themes or message the story is trying to convey? Probably not. However, for the sake of fairness, I'll also approach this criticism from a more literal perspective using the in-universe logic of the movie, because he's wrong either way. The reason nobody looked more closely into the death of a single ranch owner is because the institutions that would be responsible for investigating Otis's death don't have any real reason to. There isn't much hard evidence to go on, and attributing his death to falling debris from a passing plane is just plausible enough to justify not looking into the incident any further. Because, at least in America, the police don't actually care about finding the reason someone died. They only care about finding a reason. Otis's children obviously care, and they express doubts early on about the official explanation for their father's death, but they have extremely little power in terms of what they are able to actually do. And besides, someone still has to keep the family business running. If I'm reading it correctly, I think Logan's criticism here seemingly stems from a misunderstanding of how things like this are commonly handled. At least for normal people who aren't fortunate enough to hold celebrity status, when we die, the powers that be don't actually view it as a tragic incident that bears further investigation. It's just another Tuesday. Number 2. Why/how did the shoe stand upright on the set of Gordy's home? This one I'm sure has a reason, but I haven't found anything that makes sense. Okay, so I'll be real with you, Logan. It doesn't actually matter how the shoe stood up on its own, and that is sort of the point. Somewhere in the chaos of the Gordy's home incident, the shoe came off and by sheer dumb luck, somehow came to rest standing upright. And I can already hear you asking, if it's completely random and doesn't have any bearing on the plot, why is it here? And the answer is, it is here because Jordan Peele wants us to think about it. That's why he, as the writer, chose to put it there. It is a purely symbolic element meant to be interpreted by the viewer through the themes the film is attempting to explore. And so rather than why did Jordan Peele make the shoe stand up, I think a better question would be, what does Jordan Peele want us to think about when we look at this shoe? And the beauty of the shoe is that it asks a question to which there is no concrete answer. Thus, everyone who watches the film can come away from it with their own interpretation, and while some interpretations may seem to hold more weight than others, no one can tell you that your interpretation is flat out wrong. It's like a small piece of the story that you get to take home with you and turn into something all your own. And just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, Logan, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you what my interpretation of the shoe was. A lot of people have drawn a parallel between the shoe and what OJ describes as a bad miracle, but I'd like to take that a step further. I view the shoe as a commentary on our human desire to own our own trauma. What happened on the set of Gordy's home was a horrific tragedy that you would think most people would want to forget and move on from as quickly as possible, but Jupe doesn't ever truly move on. He internalizes what happened to him, and he makes it a part of his identity. He builds a literal shrine to the worst day of his life and charges money to let people view it. He commodifies his own trauma for the purpose of monetizing it, trying desperately to give it some sort of value, while also reveling in the attention he receives from obsessive fans. But what I find most interesting is that there's a scene where Jupe seems like he's about to launch into his own recollection of the incident to Em and OJ. However, he doesn't actually describe what happened. Instead, he describes a Saturday Night Live sketch parodying the incident. And I think this is because even as Jupe has nakedly displayed his trauma in what is essentially a mausoleum of his childhood, he wants to keep the details for himself. Because on some level, Jupe believes that what happened to him made him special. Only he came away from the Gordy's home incident unscathed. Only he witnessed the shoe standing upright. There's a reason the shoe is the centerpiece of his shrine. When they enter the room, Em only briefly glances at it before turning her attention elsewhere because, to her, the shoe means nothing. To anyone watching the movie, it means nothing. But to Jupe, it means everything. It's a physical token of his conviction that he was spared for a reason. I think that if we were able to ask Jupe the question, why did the shoe stand upright, he would answer, so I could witness it. Because when horrific things happen to us, on some level we understand that our trauma has changed us. And sometimes we rationalize and process that trauma by believing that it was good for us. That what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That we have a unique internal pain that we can convert into emotional fuel that will propel us to greater heights than we can possibly imagine because I refuse to let this break me. It is that very fuel that gives Jupe the confidence and drive to build Jupiter's claim and to try to tame a creature beyond his understanding, even while knowing there's a chance it could get himself and everyone he loves killed. Because the alternative is something even more terrifying than the possibility of being eaten alive by an unknowable alien cryptid. It is coming to terms with the possibility that something bad happened to us, changed us from the person we thought we were into the person we must now become, and none of it meant anything. And in Jupe's final moments, as he gazes up at the creature he tried to exploit for his own ends, surrounded by a whirlwind of desert sand and howling screams, I think he finally comes to terms with the fact that the shoe was just a shoe, and nothing more. Now, do I think any of that is 100% correct? Absolutely fucking not. That is my extremely personal, subjective interpretation, and admittedly, it took me a lot longer than you might think to find a way to articulate this interpretation in a way I felt comfortable sharing in a video, but That is what I want you to take away from this point, Logan. My interpretation might be full of shit, but I, at the very least, put in the thought to engage with the symbolism. Just because you can't form an answer to the question of the shoe's meaning does not mean there is no value in the question being asked. If you think that the shoe having no concrete answer to justify its existence is a valid criticism to make, I hate to tell you, but you're not actually criticizing the movie. You are criticizing your own lack of imagination. This is the nicest I'm gonna get, by the way. This shit gets much worse as we go on. Number 3. The deep-voiced cinematographer was cryptic for no reason other than to be cryptic. You're telling me this guy was willing to die because he wanted better lighting to capture the ET?
For real?
Okay, so I'm gonna give you a pass for the first part of this one, Logan. CinemaSins very clearly had access to your account while you weren't looking, so that one's not on you. This next part, though, I take issue with. See, what I think happened here was a fundamental misunderstanding of the point of Antlers Holst's character. And to be fair, Holst is definitely more of a minor character, and we only get a few brief scenes to communicate his purpose in the story. But these scenes do exist, and Logan's willful ignorance of them is not a valid criticism against the film or Holst as a character. Jordan Peele is very clearly either a huge Western fan or at the very least has an appreciation for the genre, because Nope is filled with little nods and waves to Western film tropes, one of which is commonly referred to as the retired gunslinger, the older, more experienced character who joins the main characters either as a final attempt to recapture the glory of their youth or out of a sense of obligation to pass on their knowledge and experience to the next generation. Antlers Holst is clearly meant to be an exaggerated version of this trope, and I'd say he falls mostly in the former category. The first time he's introduced as a character, he's referred to as famed cinematographer Antlers Holst. And it wasn't until later on that I realized how odd it was that such a renowned filmmaker was directing a commercial. Now, whether he's doing it as a favor to someone or simply out of sheer boredom, this is clearly a gig well below his pay grade. But I'd say the majority of his characterization comes from the conversation between him and M. When she calls him to ask for his help photographing the UFO, claiming she can give him the shot of a lifetime, he turns her down, telling her that the dream she has of standing atop the mountaintop, all of her dreams coming true, is a dream that you never wake up from. But my favorite part of this scene is a seemingly throwaway line where Holst tells M that he has a dish cooking in the oven for a room full of friends he's entertaining. The man admits to having a house full of people, and yet he sits alone in his study going over old film footage. These scenes tell us that Antlers Holst is an artist at the twilight of his career who has become disillusioned with his own success. He initially turns down M's offer because the shot of a lifetime is something that he's probably experienced dozens of times. It's only after the incident at Jupiter's Claim that he becomes intrigued enough to lend them his services. He sees an opportunity to put the ultimate exclamation point on his career and his legacy. The first man to capture footage of alien life. So, to answer your question, Logan, it wasn't that Holst was willing to die for better lighting. He was willing to die because he knew that this would be the shot that would turn him from a famed cinematographer into a household legend. The point of his character is to comment on the lengths that some artists are willing to go to when chasing the perfection of their craft, and how blinded they can be to the consequences of chasing that mountaintop that Antlers Holst eventually dies on. But I think the funniest part of this criticism is that Logan saw an artist who was so passionate about their work that they were willing to disregard their own personal health for the sake of their craft and their legacy, and he couldn't relate to it. Fucking brilliant. Number 4. Same note, man on the motorcycle. Why was his voice deep and robotic, framed to be an antagonist who'd have a grand reveal? Mystery solely for the sake of mystery is confusing and leaves too many open ends for a viewer trying to invest themselves in a storyline. So, firstly, I disagree that mystery for the sake of mystery is always bad. When executed well, it can be extremely entertaining, and it's also the only way J.J. Abrams can achieve orgasm. But secondly, the man on the motorcycle is not a fucking mystery. He is Jordan Peele criticizing and poking fun at our culture's obsession with spectacle in the most on-the-nose, least subtle way possible. The motorcyclist is chasing the UFO for the same reason M and OJ are, for fame and fortune, the shot of a lifetime, completely completely devoid of interest in anything besides hunting down the spectacle that will make him a somebody rather than the nobody he mockingly refers to M as. There's a reason M refers to him as TMZ, not because he's actually from TMZ, but because TMZ is basically shorthand for relentless paparazzi that pursue tragedy and spectacle with the single-minded focus of a predator stalking its prey. The fact that his helmet only has a single window through which he's able to see out of is showing us that he is literally only able to see what is directly in front of him, the prize he is chasing. This is hammered home further by the fact that even after he crashes his bike and lies mangled in the road, all he cares about is whether his camera is still intact. The dude is more upset over OJ not photographing him getting eaten alive by an alien than he is about getting eaten alive. This character is literally dressed reflective fucking helmet on his head to fucking toe in symbolism that has a clear thematic intent. But because Logan is looking at the story through curtain theory, his only concern is how the character is meant to drive the plot forward. Now, as far as plot development goes, his only purpose is to bring the electric bike into the story so that M can eventually use it to outrun the UFO. Everything after that is Jordan Peele using the character to poke fun at the type of person who is so obsessed with the idea of achieving fame and fortune that they would debase themselves to the point of self-dehumanization to get a few thousand clicks, collect their check, and move on to the next ambulance they'll be chasing in their Sunday vlog. Logan, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, I think you completely missed the point of this character, and I would like you to gaze into the literal mirror that is this character's face, and tell me if you see anything familiar. Number 5, my next point. Thank you, Logan. The storyline is all over the place. In a crowd of 40 people, the actress who was mauled on the set of Gordy's home was there. Why? Shock factor because of her scarring? Did she come to all of them? Did she come before the ET feeding? So, firstly, the character's name is Mary Jo Elliott. And I swear to God, I'm trying very hard not to just keep repeating myself, but unfortunately, Logan's making it very difficult, because a lot of his criticisms are actually just the same criticism over and over again. But I said I was doing all of them, so here we fucking go. Just like the shoe, and to a lesser extent the man on the motorcycle, Mary Jo Elliott is an element of the story that could honestly be removed entirely with little to no bearing on the outcome of the plot. And Logan sees this as a problem because he cannot fathom the idea of a story having a greater purpose beyond simply telling a story. He's the kid who read Animal Farm in high school and said, "Why can't the pigs walk on 2 legs all of a sudden? Shock factor," right before yelling Kobe and throwing his freshly eaten glue bottle at the side of a trash can. And if that sounds a little bit mean, it's because when you make a tweet this fucking stupid, you deserve to be embarrassed for it. For someone so obsessed with plot and semantic details, this point in particular shows that Logan straight up does not pay attention to what is being said in the movie, which should disqualify his opinion on the movie entirely, and I could just end the video right here. But I'm trying to be nice, so let's correct a few things. For starters, she does not come to all of them because the scene where she's sitting in the audience is the first time Jupe has attempted to show off his mastery over the UFO to a public audience. If it wasn't, Jupe would not have to explain that he has been feeding horses to it for the last few months, because as indicated by everyone in the crowd taking out their fucking cell phones to film the UFO, it would have spread over the goddamn internet like a wildfire ages ago. This scene is his first show, and this is the first time Mary Jo Elliott has been invited by Jupe to witness it. But none of that actually fucking matters, because her reason for being here is entirely symbolic and meant to further prod the viewer to think about the themes and ideas the film is exploring. There's a reason she's wearing a sweater with a picture of herself from before the Gordy's home incident. There's a reason she's surrounded by pinwheels and wearing an outfit designed to exude cheerfulness. Because the joyful life she should have had was stolen from her by a tragedy that left her scarred and deformed, and she is doing whatever the fuck she can to hold on to the memories of when she had everything. Hollywood literally chewed her up and spit her out, and getting a shout out from her old co-star at a cowboy-themed park in the middle of fucking nowhere is the closest she will ever get to the fame and fortune she never had a chance to chase for herself. Because being remembered and acknowledged, even for something as horrible and tragic as the Gordy's home incident, is preferable to being forgotten. So in a way, Logan's right. She is there for shock value. She's there so that Jupe can point to her in a crowd and say, "Look at the girl who was mauled by Gordy." Everybody clap. Mary Jo Elliott is one of the most tragic characters in the entire movie. She's a young child star eviscerated and cast aside by Hollywood who survives her trauma only to be consumed by her co-star's last-ditch effort to chase the type of spectacle that disfigured her in the first place. Now, that was quite a few run-on sentences just to say that Logan missed the point. Again, and my doctor has advised me against continuing because my blood pressure looks like a long division problem, but fuck it, being middle-aged is overrated, so let's keep going. Number 6. Jupe has trauma with the phenema? Are we locking that in, Logan? Is that your final... You know what? I'm gonna do you a solid. Number 6. Jupe has trauma with the phenomena of commercializing predators for profits, and for the last 6 months, he's been feeding horses to an ET in the sky. But what about before that? What is the purpose of that creepy cowboy theme park? So, I genuinely considered just ignoring this one. For starters, it's really hard to understand what the actual criticism is supposed to be, and secondly, this very much indicates to me that Logan is either incapable of thoughtfully engaging with the story on any level above watching flashing images on a screen, or that was never his intention in the first place, but I'll get more into that in the next part. For now, let's try to interpret what the fuck Logan is actually trying to say here. From the way this is worded, I can only guess that he is dissatisfied with the fact that there are no connecting scenes between the Gordy's home incident and Jupe setting up the theme park. But let me ask you, Logan, if there was a scene detailing all the jobs or gigs Jupe was working in the interim between Gordy's home and the present day, would that make the movie better? If there was a montage of Jupe working dead-end acting jobs, deciding to build a theme park, buying the land, building the park, setting up the shrine in his office, would that add anything to the movie? And by add, I mean, would any of those scenes serve the themes of spectacle, trauma, and legacy that Nope is trying to explore in any sort of meaningful way? Probably not. What they would do is spend an unnecessary amount of time explaining to the audience something that they don't need to be explained to them. Kind of like what I'm doing right now. And I am certain that Logan, along with those who agree with his criticisms, will probably view what I'm going to say next as a cop-out argument because I'm biased, either against him or for Jordan Peele and his movies. And he's right, but that doesn't make what I'm going to say next any less true. At its heart, the art of storytelling is a balancing act. You want to give enough information to ensure that the audience understands what is happening and can follow along, but without overloading them with useless exposition that neither enhances the plot or the themes it is exploring. Now, there are times where leaving gaps of information can hurt the story in terms of suspension of disbelief, but you know what hurts a story more? When it's fucking boring. There are no concrete rules when it comes to storytelling, but there are what I would call best practices. One of which is show the most interesting parts of your characters' lives. There's a reason we don't see Obi-Wan Kenobi sitting in the desert and fucking womp rats for 20 years before Luke enters the story. And there's a reason we don't see what Jupe does before or during the construction of Jupiter's claim, because in the context of the story being told right now, it does not matter. And this question of what is the point of the theme park is so vague and lazy and undefined that I should just ignore it and feel very good and sexy about doing so, but as a last-ditch good faith effort to try to answer whatever the fuck I can guess that Logan is confused about, I'll try to tell you the point of Jupe's theme park. Besides being a further accentuation of the cowboy aesthetic that makes up a good chunk of the film's visual presentation, why do you think it's called Jupiter's Claim? Because that's exactly what it is. After being cast aside by Hollywood following the Gordy's home incident, Jupe was adrift and searching for purpose. He built the park so that he could say, "This is my spot. I'm gonna make my presence known, and it all begins here." Or maybe it's something as simple as Jupe was bored and rich and decided to open a theme park, and he thought that a Western theme would best fit the location. Regardless, the end result is that Jupe's acting career went on hiatus after the Gordy's home incident, and at some point he decided to build a theme park in the desert, which led to him discovering a UFO-type creature living in the hills. God, this tweet is like reading Flowers for Algernon and getting mad because it didn't describe Charlie Gordon's brain surgery in explicit graphic detail. None of this is shit that you need a detailed explanation of in order to enjoy the story, which is why it's fucking baffling that Logan is trying to turn this into a fucking criticism. For someone so obsessed with only paying attention to the bare-naked plot of a movie, he is making it extremely hard for himself to actually enjoy the plot by trying to extrapolate some inconsistency in the continuity of something. I honestly don't know. I hope somewhere in all of those rambling run-on sentences of unfocused bullshit I have answered your question, Logan, And if I didn't, maybe ask a better question next time. Number 7. Why was so much emphasis placed on the name of the horses? They had title cards. Why? So, this is not actually a criticism. This is nonsense. And honestly, it's put me in a bit of a predicament. This criticism is so vapid, devoid of substance, and honestly just plain lazy, that it should be dismissed without comment. And yet it is precisely because it is so baffling in its emptiness that it demands our attention. You'll notice that Logan doesn't actually criticize anything about the title cards. He doesn't criticize their design, their timing, that they're intrusive, or that they interrupt the pacing. Nothing. He is criticizing them for their existence. And I can barely respond to this as a criticism because there's nothing to unpack or refute. This is like criticizing Star Wars for having an opening title crawl, or No Country for Old Men for not having a soundtrack. It's a criticism that exists for its own sake, so that whoever made it can use it to talk down to someone infinitely more talented than they are. And I'm gonna go ahead and drop the veneer of pretending like I'm being nice to Logan, because while this tweet is the most egregious, none of these points are being made in a good faith attempt to make legitimate observations about the quality of this film. There is a reason that the majority of his points are framed as questions. Not because he's actually willing to entertain other perspectives, but because it's a defense mechanism, so that even if someone refutes his criticism of the film, he and his defenders can fall back on the age-old excuse of he's just asking questions, and if the film was as good as everyone says it is, he wouldn't have to ask these questions in the first place. It allows him to feel like the smartest guy in the room while keeping his actual criticisms vague enough that he can abandon them at the first sign of legitimate pushback. Basically, Logan is pulling a Schrodinger's douchebag, but he's trying to be smart rather than funny. A Schrodinger's dipshit, if you will. So the jig is up, lads. I don't actually care about convincing Logan Paul that his criticisms are stupid. The purpose of this whole thread begins and ends with Logan's ego. However, I do think there is value in breaking down why this tweet fucking sucks. Because anyone with a shred of media literacy will see this and immediately recognize what Logan is trying to do here. But simply calling his entire Twitter thread literal horseshit, which it is not a compelling argument to anyone who genuinely doesn't get why this is bad criticism. So while breaking down why this tweet is garbage might seem a bit redundant, I do think that every once in a while, as a treat, it is important to call out disingenuous word vomit like this. I'll circle back to this near the end of the video, but to sum things up for the moment, Logan Paul bad. Thank you very much, like the video, subscribe, try the veal, on to the next one. Number 8. Why was Barbie Ferreira, an incredible acting talent, so underutilized in this movie? Why was she even in the movie? So, I am admittedly not super familiar with Barbie Ferreira as an actress. I only recently found out Euphoria is a TV show and not something people smoke out of a garbage can at Coachella. However, I can sympathize with being a fan of someone's acting and wishing they were used in more scenes. I talked about something similar in my Northman review regarding Anya Taylor-Joy's character. And who knows, maybe Jordan Peele did initially intend for her character to play a larger role in the story. Maybe there were some changes to the script or the production processes that led to this character having a smaller part than intended. Or perhaps she was cast for this brief singular scene and that was it. We don't know, and we might never know. But the thing to take away from this is that while we can ruminate on possible additions that might have improved a film, we cannot judge a movie based on what we wanted it to be. We can only judge it for what it is. And to Barbie Ferreira's credit, for the brief time she was on screen, her performance packed a pretty poignant punch. Possibly. Potentially. Perfidy? Periodically. Sorry, I'm a little high. And some of you may be scratching your heads at that statement for many reasons, because the scene she's in is so brief that you could blink and miss it. And if you'll allow me, which if you're still watching by this point, you obviously will, I'd like to take a moment to read way too much into this particular scene. After Angel finishes setting up the cameras for the Haywoods, he remotely accesses the feed while he's at work, much to M's displeasure when he calls her to inform them of a praying mantis blocking the camera. And Barbie Ferreira's character, whose name is Missy, just pops up out of nowhere here, surprising Angel and the audience to a lesser extent. Soon after, the UFO shows up again and everything starts going to shit. At this point, Angel is noticeably upset and staring at the screen with a look of distress. It is then that Barbie's character asks him what's wrong, to which he hastily replies that everything's fine. The camera cuts back to her for just a second or two, and I can't fully explain why, but the expression she makes in this one instant filled me with this utter sense of dread and discomfort. This is what somebody's face looks like when they are tearing the legs off a spider one by one. a chilling mix of childlike curiosity and sadistic glee. In a film that explores the themes of spectacle and exploitation through considerably less subtle means, this scene is uncharacteristically intimate. As Logan so eloquently puts it in his opening tweet, it's not hard to conceptualize something disturbing. A trained chimp goes animalistic and mauls an entire set, or a UFO devours anything in its path, which, yeah, these are very striking concepts that work well for a film that wants to talk about the nature of spectacle. But I think it would be very limiting to think of spectacle only through bombastic events that just about anyone could find intriguing or attention-grabbing. You could argue that spectacle as a concept sometimes manifests itself in considerably more intimate variations, and it isn't always as innocent as simply having your attention seized by something that is so far out of the ordinary that it demands said attention. Sometimes spectacle lies in the seemingly mundane. For the sadists and voyeurs who walk among us, sometimes a spectacle can be as simple as a fascination with another person's pain and discomfort. In this scene, Angel is outwardly expressing genuine anxiety at what he's watching on screen, and all Missy can do is just stare at him, unblinking, with an expression akin to a child burning ants with a magnifying glass. I can only speak for myself when I first watched this scene, but for just a moment, I genuinely couldn't tell if I was more afraid of the alien creature stalking the Haywoods Ranch, or this girl standing in a hardware store just staring. I'm almost certainly reading too much into this, and admittedly a lot of this section's analysis is more just me having fun with how inviting this film is for people like me who like to wring as much thematic exploration out of a film as I can. Do I actually think Jordan Peele intended for this scene to be interpreted this way? If I'm being honest, it's not very likely. But whether you agree with that interpretation of this scene, I think at the very least we can agree that for the brief moment that she was on screen, it's not a stretch to say that Barbie Ferreira did a good job with her performance. And I liked it enough that I would have enjoyed seeing more of her, so if you want to call that her being underutilized, I'm willing to walk with you on this one, Logan. You're still getting an F, but it's an F+, and I'm very proud of you for pulling that off. And I think that's all of his points, so that'll do it for this video. You know, Logan, I know I've been laying into you pretty hard, but I'm glad we could end this on a positive note where we all got to learn something new and come together, and god fucking damn it. Number 9. Way to strip all the life from a phenomenal actor, Daniel Kaluuya, by casting him as possibly the most mundane, vanilla character I've ever seen. Not a question, I'm just pissed. Well, on the plus side, I guess that's another thing we can commiserate on, Logan. Neither of us knows when to shut the fuck up. And knowing when to shut the fuck up is kind of the point of Daniel Kaluuya's character. If you couldn't tell, one of my pet peeves in media criticism is when people are unable to tell the difference between a mundane character and a stoic character. This is also just another really vague and lazy criticism that could be applied to any character who isn't constantly outwardly expressive. Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad is a character who frequently speaks in a calm, controlled manner that rarely betrays his innermost thoughts. The bored, stone-faced expression he wears while being grilled by the cops is the same one he wears when putting several bullets through someone's chest. But I know Logan doesn't have the balls to call Mike a mundane character, because then he'd have legions of Mike stans gearing up to do a full measure flame war on his ass, the likes of which is rarely seen outside of K-pop Twitter, or when you criticize Cyberpunk. But hey, we've got different tastes and preferences, and maybe Logan just doesn't care for this particular archetype, in which case he should just man the fuck up and say so, instead of looking like an idiot by trying to twist the fact that OJ is a more emotionally reserved character into a criticism of the movie as a whole. Because I think it's kind of an insult to Daniel Kaluuya as an actor to refer to his portrayal of OJ as having the life stripped out of him. Being able to convincingly portray someone who always appears to have their shit together is not as easy to pull off as it seems, and when it's done poorly, it can be downright cringeworthy. But not only that, OJ's more subdued responses to the fantastical events he and M have been thrust into is partially what keeps them level-headed enough to confront the UFO creature and survive. Jordan Peele makes some fairly on-the-nose commentary regarding our society's relationship to spectacle and the harm that such an obsession can produce. It is not a coincidence that the main character in his story about being swept up in the pursuit of the fantastical is a down-to-earth, earth, soft-spoken, hard-working everyman who wants to do right by his father's legacy and take care of his family. But my biggest gripe with this criticism is that I just do not agree that OJ is a mundane character. Granted, I don't think he's the deepest or most complex character I've ever seen, but then again, the story doesn't really need him to be. As a character, OJ doesn't really go through any fundamental changes as the story progresses. And some might say that in and of itself is enough to justify calling him a mundane character, which I obviously disagree with. In storytelling, there's a difference between character growth and character definition. A well-defined character does not always grow and change as the story progresses, and a character who experiences a lot of growth is not always precisely defined. And while OJ's character arc is fairly static, he is written well enough that we can grasp a clear picture of who he is as a person. In early scenes, we can see that he is visibly uncomfortable when it comes to public speaking, and while he's on set, he has to rely on his sister to be the mouthpiece of their business. But this doesn't mean we're meant to view him as a pushover. We see that he's perfectly capable of holding his own when negotiating with Jupe, and he even chastises M for not taking the meeting seriously. And when the chips are down, it's OJ who stares down the UFO on horseback without a second thought, completely willing to throw himself into the face of some Evangelion angel-looking ass monstrosity because someone's gotta do it. In a film littered with Western tropes, OJ is undeniably a straight-up, Buster Scruggs, cool as a cucumber, motherfucking cowboy. And I absolutely love that even as much of a stone-cold badass as he is, he's not an invincible Gary Stu wannabe. There's a scene around the end of the second act, after the UFO has consumed everyone at Jupiter's Claim. Hovering over the ranch house, it pours out their remains in a deluge of blood. As OJ pulls up to the house, he pokes his head out, sees the UFO, then promptly does this. And I remember watching the scene in the theater and thinking that a lesser writer would have had him immediately run into the house to grab M and Angel. But OJ takes one look at the situation, reminds the audience what movie they're watching, and stays in the car. Because while he is kind of a fucking badass, he's not stupid. And he is badass. Eventually there comes a point in the story where the UFO has M terrified enough to want to leave the ranch behind. And when M asks OJ to come with her, he says no because, in his own words, someone's gotta feed the horses. And speaking of M, OJ's relationship with his sister is probably one of my favorite aspects of his character. Crafting a good sibling dynamic in a movie can often be more difficult than you might think. There needs to be a certain rhythm and ease in their interactions to maintain the sense that you're watching two people who have grown up together. It requires a writer who can craft the dialogue necessary to convey this dynamic, and actors who can bounce off each other well enough to bring the words to life. Which is yet another reason I find this comment to be so insulting to Kaluuya's acting ability. Also, I haven't mentioned Keke Palmer at all thus far, and I do want to confirm that she portrayed this character extremely well. Part of the reason OJ works so much as a character is because he has this relentless ball of energy for his sister to bounce off of. But at the same time, Daniel Kaluuya's ability to exude this quiet sense of reliability and self-assuredness basically forms the bedrock for the character. However, if OJ were nothing more than a rock-solid wall of stoicism, Logan's claim still wouldn't be correct, but at the very least it would hold more water. Unfortunately, I'm gonna poke a few holes in his shitty little idea boat. Because even as subdued and reserved as OJ is, one thing he makes abundantly clear throughout the movie is that he genuinely cares about his sister. When M first floats the idea of trying to photograph the UFO, I was actually kind of surprised at how willing OJ was to go along with it. And you might say that this passiveness is proof that Logan's right, but we see in other scenes that he's perfectly willing and able to call M out on her bullshit when he feels it's warranted. I've known people who wouldn't trust their siblings enough to drop $10 on a Chicago food truck, but here OJ is willing to drop a few $100s during a time when the ranch is going through financial troubles on a full camera setup to try and get footage of a literal flying saucer, all because his sister thought it was a worthwhile venture and he trusts her enough to follow her lead. But my favorite moment between M and OJ comes when OJ decides what they should call the UFO creature. You see, when M was 9, their father Otis had promised a horse to her that she would be able to train and raise all on her own. That horse's name being Jean Jacket. However, when Otis received an offer for said horse from a Western production, he abruptly went back on his word, electing instead to have OJ help him train the horse. And M clearly viewed this as a sort of betrayal by her father. As an adult, she recounts to OJ how she watched them train the horse that was meant to be hers from their upstairs window. She tells of how Otis very intentionally avoided looking at her, as if to further drive the point home that her wishes were not important to him. But she remembers that OJ alone made it a point to meet her gaze. And while this gesture is small enough to seem borderline insignificant in the face of her father's betrayal, in that moment, It meant the world to M, enough that she still remembers and brings it up years after the fact. OJ let her know that he saw her pain and acknowledged it. It didn't make up for what their father did, but at the very least, it made her feel as if she wasn't alone. Fast forward to later in the movie, when they all sit down to formulate a plan to photograph the UFO, OJ decides to give it a name. And what does he name it? Jean Jacket, the horse that should have been M's. When I first watched this scene in the theater, I could not stop smiling. There's an old saying that goes along the lines of better to be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubts, and this is a nice summation of OJ's character. He's a man of few words, which means we have to discern much of his character through his actions. It also means that when he does speak, it's because he has something worth saying. With just 2 words, OJ reaffirms to M that he never forgot how she felt about the loss of her horse and the trust in their father, and reframes the entire endeavor of trying to capture a UFO on film as a sort of redemption for M. It might not be a horse, but she finally gets to reclaim the opportunity to prove herself after having it denied to her all those years ago. I realize I've spent quite a bit of this video talking about OJ, and if you don't like this character, that's fine. The silent, stoic archetype isn't everyone's cup of tea, and it's clear that it's not Logan's. But criticizing a character and an actor's performance as mundane simply because they don't run their fucking mouth every 2 seconds is not a point of view I can respect. There is a significant amount of characterization that you have to blatantly ignore in order to think this is good criticism. I have my own issues with knowing when to shut the fuck up, but even I would not be able to write nearly 2,000 words dissecting and discussing O.J. Haywood if he were as mundane as Logan claims him to be. Number 10. An extraterrestrial creature that is advanced enough to fully shapeshift, activate an anti-electromagnetic field, and propel itself in any direction quickly and quietly can't tell the difference between a plastic inflatable and a viable meal? Nope. So this may seem obvious, but it is Logan, so I'll just say it. An animal's physical abilities and characteristics are not indicators of intelligence. An octopus can change the color and texture of its skin to blend in with its surroundings, has venomous saliva, and can spray ink to create a pseudo-image of itself to distract predators, and yet octopuses are not smart enough to not use human garbage as shelter. How unrealistic. I hope you enjoyed those octopus facts. Another one is they're able to contort and condense their bodies to fit through spaces as small as a quarter. That's right, an octopus could swim up your entire asshole, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Now, Jean Jacket is clearly a creature with impressive natural capabilities, but behaviorally, it is shown to be surprisingly predictable. There are a number of points where direct comparisons are drawn between Jean Jacket's behavior and the behavior of other animals shown in the movie.
I wonder if that's why it was included in the fucking title cards.
Specifically, its territorial nature and sensitivity to eye contact. And it is due to the character's shift in mindset from treating it like a cosmic entity that defies comprehension to treating it like a predator that can be predicted and manipulated based on its observed behavior that allows them to eventually conquer it. And this is also why OJ decides to give it a name, in addition to the reasons involving his sister I already went over. Because the power of horror is largely based in the unknown, the incomprehensible. Once something has a name, it loses a small bit of that unknowability, and once you begin to understand something, you are that much closer to overcoming it. Jean Jacket is strange and horrifying and alien, which is why Jupe is so fascinated with it and fixates upon it as a stepping stone for his own goals. But M and OJ are the ones who eventually beat it because they see it for what it is, an animal. And animals, while dangerous, can be tamed. Also, it's communicated multiple times, very obviously, that eye contact is a major factor in whether or not Jean Jacket decides to eat something. And what does the plastic inflatable have, Logan? Does it have big fucking eyes? Does it? Can you see them? I know you can't see the fucking point, but you can see the eyes, right? Right? Anyway, that was Logan Paul's top 10 reasons why Nope was one of the worst movies he's seen all year. I said I was going through all 10, and despite all medical advice to the contrary, I did it. So now that we're done, I'd like to make a few closing comments if you'll allow me. It's a bit of a journey, but there is a point at the end. You're cool with that, right? You seem chill. I bet you've seen Space Dandy. I did briefly touch on it at the beginning, but I'm sure some people are still wondering as to why I would spend so much time dissecting and responding to the opinion of Logan Paul, of all people, on the subject of media criticism. And part of it is because I'm one of those losers who thinks that art is important, storytelling specifically. Beyond being one of the oldest forms of entertainment, stories allow us to confront and process a litany of ideas and concepts in ways that can dramatically shape our perspective of the world around us. And because of this, I also believe that criticism of storytelling is important. And what Logan is doing here is, in my opinion, bad criticism, which, given that criticism is an almost entirely subjective field, is a contentious statement to make. I'm not oblivious to that. And I'm not even saying that Logan is wrong or bad to come to the conclusion that he doesn't like Nope. Not every story can be made for everyone, which is good. That's how we get weird shit like Killer Clowns and Evangelion. Yes, they are on the same level, shut the fuck up. So while I disagree with Logan's conclusion, that's not what I take issue with. My problem is with the method by which he arrived at that conclusion. Media literacy is a phrase that has become a bit of a buzzword online, mostly by people on Twitter who like to use words without knowing what they mean. And to give a broad definition, media literacy is essentially the act of analyzing a story with the goal of deepening one's own understanding of it. And what many people seem to forget about media literacy is that it is a skill you have to practice and cultivate. It's a conscious effort that you have to make. It is not an innate characteristic that you just happen to have because you're such a smart little guy. Storytelling itself is a language that you have to learn and interpret before you're able to truly grasp the full measure of a story's quality and value. And just like any language, the fastest way to become fluent is to immerse yourself in it. The more stories you experience, the more you'll notice patterns and repeating symbols and techniques that authors utilize to convey their ideas. And the more you recognize these elements, the easier it will be to recognize the difference between an author telling you what's happening in a story and telling you what the story is about. Being able to recognize when and where in the narrative this is happening is crucial to analyzing and understanding the full scope of a story. But to finally bring this back around to Logan Paul's Nope review, the reason Logan did not enjoy this movie is because he does not understand the language of storytelling. For all intents and purposes, Logan may as well have been watching a French film with the subtitles turned off. This French film specifically. And this is partially why I unironically toyed with the idea of being less, dickish in my criticism of him, because I genuinely had to figure out whether or not he was aware of the fact that he was missing something. Was this a case of ignorance or arrogance? And Logan, being the overachiever that he is, I think it's both. He frames so many of his criticisms as questions because, on some level, he feels there's something he's missing from this movie. But rather than consider the possibility that he might be missing something crucial in his own critical perspective, he frames his own ignorance as a flaw of the movie. And if you want to see what I would consider definitive proof of this, it's right here in his final tweets at the end of his review. I love Peele, the visual effects, and aesthetic. But my thesis is this. I can feel him attempting to recreate the shock from Get Out and Us. Mystery, violent allure, and cinematic choices made for the sake of reaction instead of legitimate contribution to the storyline killed this movie for me. After watching a film that is so blatantly on the nose about its thematic identity, that uses its story to not only explore the nature of spectacle, but also critique and rebuke our society's relationship to and pursuit of spectacle, Logan accuses Jordan Peele of sacrificing the coherence of his own story for the sake of spectacle. Holy shit. When I touched on Death of the Author at the beginning of this video, I mentioned how I had some issues with it, but one thing I do like about it is it takes the position that there is no right way to interpret a story. And I do somewhat agree with that. I think storytelling as an art form is so malleable and fluid that no story out there really should have a singular, definitive interpretation. However, while I don't think there is a singular correct way to interpret a story, I do think there are wrong ways to interpret a story. And this is one of them. If your opinion of a story is formed by disregarding the existence of an entire film's worth of thematic exposition and subtext, then I feel very comfortable disregarding your opinion, Logan. Storytelling, by its very nature, is a conversation between the writer and their audience. Because of this, some writers will write stories that ask, sometimes demand, that their audience actively engages with the story. They will ask you to interpret, recognize, and think about what you are seeing and how it makes you feel. And if you don't want to do that, if you do want to just sit back and have a laugh and be done with it, that's fine, but it's not the story's fault that you are refusing to meet it on its own terms. Now, because I'm an intellectual titan, I can feel someone already typing, why do I have to put this much thought into a movie in order to enjoy it? Why can't I just turn my brain off and have a good time? And the answer is, you can. There are a ridiculous number of stories out there that are designed to give you that kind of experience. But even with that in mind, I think you'll find that a number of the best turn your brain off stories still have a surprising amount of things going on under the hood if you're willing to pay attention. A good story does not happen by accident. Now, if you're someone who came into this video agreeing with all of Logan's criticisms here, I hope at the very least I've explained my opinion in a way that has given you something to think about. And if by some miracle you're still watching this video, that's a good sign that you're at least somewhat open to entertaining a different perspective. So I'll issue you the challenge that the next time you're watching a movie or a show or reading a book, if anyone still does that, turn your brain on. Really dig into what is being portrayed in front of you. Look for areas where the author might be expressing intent and is looking for someone just like you. Someone willing to put in the effort to recognize what they are trying to say. Don't psych yourself out over it. Like I said, this is a skill that you can improve upon, and the more stories you consume with this mindset, the easier it will become. Hell, there may be times where you'll discover an interpretation that the writer wasn't even aware they were expressing, and they can't tell you you're wrong. It's perfectly acceptable to murder an author, just try not to piss on their grave afterward. I guess what I'm trying to say is, the next time you're in the middle of a story, and you see a set of blue curtains, ask yourself, is there a reason the author chose to make them blue? You may be correct, you may be less than correct. The important thing is that you took the time to ask the question. And before I go, I do want it to be said, there is nothing inherently wrong with turning your brain off. We live in a stressful fucking time, and sometimes you just need to unplug. But at the very least, you should know where the on-off switch is, because I promise you, a story can be so much more than something you use to simply pass the time. There is a whole universe of ideas and perspectives and rabbit holes and fun right outside your window. But until you get up off your chair, walk to the window, and pull the curtains open, you'll never see it. You are smarter than Logan Paul. Never forget that. So, in conclusion, Nope good, Logan Paul bad, curtains worse.